The words are very specific. We worked out. So how would you discuss this shape of the building in terms of the council code and in terms of the slope and in terms of the scale of the triangles of the other roofs and that sort of thing? So you find a range of buildings from old folks' home, which has to have a bus stop within so many meters of their front entry, according to the council codes, to more general words. But the more general words usually turns out that in the discussion, the architects give you the more specific sense. And then the students would write a few sentences to point out the specific sense that the word has been given in this context. So usually the students found particular images important for explaining the keywords. There's a second kind of keywords that we tend not to know about in the M2 reviews here, and they are the structures, types, the structural types and effects. Usually we don't talk about that. In first semester or in the second semester, by and large, we don't encounter them in the crits. The structural types are like one-way frames, two-way frames, diagrids, like very specific terms with a sense of the structural action. There's a book about this that you can refer to. It's called The Function of Form. It gives you case studies as well. So if you get the gist of the talk so far, we've spent about half an hour. We would like you to get the overall picture about the purpose of keywords. The keywords are not classifications. They do not fit your project into a category or a number of categories. The keywords point to the specificity of your thinking as it emerges in the designing. And it helps the jury understand the particularities of what you are proposing, how you are resourcing the thinking, how your work is related to the work of other people. That need not be famous people or famous ideas, could be the most hugging the ground thing imaginable, like the politician who might be killed. So you get this sense that there's a fine grain in the thinking. If there is a cluster of keywords and you do not get a sense that there is a fine grain of thinking, it's a waste of time. So it is a helping you to move into the thing. You may use very general words, like some of those students in the site analysis, but really the point is really to say a few words to give that general word much more specificity. So the word like domesticity is overused in Australia. It means almost nothing. But if you talk about it with a couple of images, it allows you to get into the sense of the architect who is doing the design. About the diagramming, there is, I did offer an elective about diagrams 2 years ago. In the diagramming, there are specific techniques of diagramming. Usually, the diagrams bring together at least two kinds of information. The diagrams are not segregating different kinds of information into separate diagrams. Usually, you would like 2 or 3 kinds of information put together in one sheet. There's a lot to say about that. About the keywords and the key understandings, is not about the more the merrier. It's not about showing off how much you know about architectural history. It's about showing how you can work specifically with ideas, with a fine grain of ideas. if the definitions are missing, it often helps you that you have very interesting case studies that put a slant on one thing or the other. The site analysis and the structural types, they are apparently what everyone will deal with. We have, in the last few years in this school, the understanding that you either start with a very specific program or you start with a very specific site. And if you have neither, by week 4, you're stuffed. So you get the idea. Right? So we haven't said very much about programming today because that takes another hour. But we've pushed a little bit the site analysis and the specificity of the keywords for the site analysis. In the next half hour, what I can do is say something about abstracts, and then I would like to show you some samples of student work from the master's program at Cambridge University. It's fairly easy for you to find samples of abstracts. And the first issue that you want to think about when you deal with abstracts is the scale. The same consideration works for PhD students as well. The abstracts are the things you write when you have not thought through the thing. So you want people to believe that you are going to be sane about it and not going all over the place. So it's a publicity document, not an honest statement of everything you don't know. It should point to a direction of thinking that has not entirely worked itself out yet. You don't have enough space to say everything anyway, so you just have to say enough for people to believe that you have something rather than nothing. In the history of Western thinking, the most fundamental action is to ask questions and to give answers. And in Greek philosophy, that is the most basic thing. And usually in thinking, if you have new questions, or if you have probing questions, or if you can trick somebody up by asking naughty questions, like the politician who is about to be killed or is thinking about getting himself killed, is asking questions about certain backroom deals, right? So in the history of Western thinking, asking questions is the most important thing. If you ask the wrong question or if you change the question, the whole field changes. So after you have asked the questions, there would be skills also in providing answers. But really asking questions is really hot. And it has been hot for several thousand years, and it's not about to disappear. So one of the most important things that we can point you to is the idea that there are questions. And in everything you read, like in magazines and so on, when people say something, there are implied questions that they are responding to. They might not tell you which implied question they are responding to, but at every turn they are responding to implied questions. In Hong Kong cafes, if you see old ladies having lunch together, the old lady will say, hey, is your son married? And then there will be an answer. And then, the price of real estate has gone up. And then the other old lady will say, yes, the price has gone up, fallen 10% or whatever, right? So then you see in the whole conversation, this toing and throwing between questions and answers. There is, to be honest, no strict logical necessity about the sequence of these old ladies' questions. But because they are in the atmosphere of friendship, people think that they are not completely nuts, even though the topic is really diverse. So in what follows, we want to show you how to read for implied questions. Because usually, if you think about your own design and you are trying to articulate your own concerns, these concerns are very often articulated, potentially articulated as questions that you are providing answers to in one form or another. So what we did with PhD students some time ago in Australia is to say, we download the most popular 15 articles from the Journal of Architecture, and we read the introduction together, line by line. And so you get something like this, like here's an abstract, and then here's the introduction. Right? So what happens afterwards is that there will be a page These are the questions. So it's an article in a journal, it's not a textbook. So the questions are tending to be rather specific. They are not entry-level questions. They already imply that the reader is already engaged with a particular range of discussions, and we can go straight to something. So here is a second article. It's about the Acropolis Museum in Athens that Xiumi has recently completed. There's a rather long abstract, and then we are going to look at the here's the questions. So whenever you read a few sentences, you ask yourself, what are these sentences replying to? And you work out the implied question. So usually, if you pose questions in your head and you answer them, the text that is the reply forms the text, and then you eventually have 700 words or 800 words for your presentation in the jury. Your advisor will help you, in effect, to work out what were the most interesting questions that you should give an account of in front of the jury. So usually they are not the most general questions, like where is the site? There's some more secondary level question about the site that you should give an account of. Here's an article about how architectural drawings work. Can you see? So can we imagine an article of 5,000 words answering 5 questions? It means that each question is motivating several paragraphs. Right? So if you are writing 5,000 words for your studio book thing at the end of the semester or any of the year, you think about which are the questions that will motivate the discussion. So usually it would be possible, if you spelled out these questions, to ask your advisor which questions are worthwhile, which questions are too simplistic. You can have a chat about that. Right? Usually the advisor's comments on your drawings and in the course of discussion, usually they would have pushed one thing or another. And if you paid attention, there is a question there that they are working on with you. They may not have said it in so many words, but they are actually doing it. The next article is about Koolhaas and Ungers. Koolhaas and Ungers had an early working relationship. So the questions in this case are proposed by a student from Iran, struggling with English. But the thing to remember is, if you struggle with English, you can still show that you are thinking. It is not true that you have to have perfect sentences in order to show that you are thinking. And the crux for the thinking is really the cogency between the question and the answer. If the question is shooting this way and the answer is going like way off beam, then you're crazy. You're not just struggling with English. You've got some other problem, right? So I would say we don't worry too much about the perfect English, and we try to demonstrate that the thinking shines through. And in a design studio situation, you know, because you do have drawings and models, and people can read between what you say and the other two media. So you do have a better chance of getting through. And the diagrams would have helped us get together the thing. You are only speaking 700 words in front of the jury. So the 700 words are not just answering questions, they are helping us understand the visual bits in front of us to show how those visual bits go towards a particular understanding of a particular issue or question that is pertinent to your work. It's a particular company that invested a lot of money in research, apparently. This is an article pursuing this company. So usually when we encourage people to read, like you may have heard earlier in many years ago that people suggested that reading is a good idea. It is not that reading for the information is the good idea. It is that if you were reading rationally or properly, you would have sensitized yourself to the broad range of concerns and questions that motivate people in our field in different arenas of work. And to the extent that you are acculturized to the range of questions and pursuits that people are engaged with, to that extent your own field of work is enriched by these impressions of what happens around you in a particular period, say in the 30 years before you or 30 years that you're working. So it is not quite like in history and theory, we give you an exam to say, define such and such a term, or really that kind of historical memory. It is that there is a broader sensitivity to questions, ways of handling a discussion. How many questions can you answer in 5,000 words? That kind of basic sensibility. We also would like people in the course of their reading to show some enhancement of their skills in doing case studies, because in our architectural work, it takes several years to do a project very often, and you have only so many years. So reading about case studies is a way for you to gain the benefit of other people's experience in a short, quick way. So if you have been doing this, like 10 buildings a year for 4 years already, you will have 40 case studies at the back of you, and then your sense of pertinence, how images sit together to talk about a story, you would have been better prepared for this. If you haven't done any of that work, it's something that you can start now. So that is the bit about implied questions. We did this little exercise with the PhD students here 2 years ago, I think. And one of the PhD students started cutting through the abstract. So this is an abstract she found. And we said to her, you know, the abstracts usually come as a chunk of text, but they are not just one chunk of text like mashed potatoes. There are different segments in there. So we wanted everyone to work out the different segments, because usually a question is related to each segment. Right? So the first job is really to read the abstract and then chop it up, and then to work out the implied questions for each segment. So here she's labeling the segments from A to F, and then she says, it's like that. And then she says, there are 2 big questions implied in all of that. And usually, you need to do this 10 times or 12 times before you get the hang of it. If you do it once or twice, it's very precarious. So she makes a second case. She cuts it up again, and she comes up with two things. I'm not saying that she does it very well, but she started practicing it, which is the main thing. We also started collecting our own faculty members' abstracts. So, for example, Edward students would have collected something Edward published, and we would read Edward's abstracts. And Edward's abstracts are actually quite interesting. They're very well put together. And usually it's fairly cut and dried, and no wild moves, actually. In some of the history and theory journals, when you can find abstracts, those journals usually have abstracts that go all over the place. But in the abstracts that Edward is doing, you usually find it fairly direct and it's very helpful. So I would suggest you look at something like that and see how cut and dried it can be. Usually in these abstracts you write for journals. They are fairly short, 200 words or so. What you are doing is 3 times as long, so the scale is very different. But the basic understanding is this. There are abstracts for 200 pages of a PhD thesis, also 300 words in length. And then there are 200 or 300 words abstracts for a conference paper or a journal article, 5,000 words. So between 5,000 words and 200 pages, the change in the scale is quite a lot, right? So usually, when we assess qualifying exams for PhD students, we understand that people haven't thought it through. But we would like to get a sense that they have proposed something for 200 pages and not 5,000 words. So usually if the person who is rather too focused gives us the wrong impression. Sometimes they also propose much more than 200 pages, and then we also think maybe something strange has happened. So scaling is something that we pay attention to when we think about the abstract. So you're writing 5,000 words, I understand. So 200 words to describe 5,000 words is a particular scale. And if you read the journals, you get the hang of that. And your advisors have been writing these sorts of things, so they can fairly quickly tell you what sounds like a reasonable relationship between 200 words of an abstract and 5,000 words of the text. I'm beginning to run out of time, so I will give you a few moments to the Cambridge examples. 2 years ago, I was lucky enough to be external examiner for Cambridge MPhil theses. They do spend time doing a research, and then they do a design. And this is the document that they come up with that gets sent out. I think Edward, Jin, and I, we have all been involved in different times with this kind of assessment. So they do have an abstract. And you can see it's 4 or 5 paragraphs normally. They have a visual abstract as well. There's a table of contents, which seem terribly intense. They write 200 something, the document is about 200 pages in Cambridge. It's not like that here, you may be pleased to know. But because we are desperately trying to get RIBA accreditation, they do expect us to do a thesis. And they have at the back of their mind something like this. And ours is a lot shorter, I'm afraid. So it's always kind of like trying to persuade people that 2 very different scales of operation can somehow be worth the accreditation. So food production, the relationship between urban agriculture and what we might design, is a theme that we have seen here as well. And it seems what they do is that they have more verbalization of what they've learned in the research phase. our people think and they read, and maybe they don't read very much, and whatever they think we don't know.